Today, we will just be kind of discussing some of the statistical variances that we found within specific subcategories. So, let's see. Looking at the first one, let's see, we can look at the overall means. On this spreadsheet, I have listed the overall mean, and then I have the subcategory mean, done like from an individual standpoint. So, looking just at this first spreadsheet, the overall mean for the first subcategory for sample 1 would be, for the critical thinking portion, it would be 3.5. And then same for combination and same for written communication. So we don't really have much of any variance in that column so far. Nor in the overall median, we do have a slight difference compared to the other two, and that would be in the written communication section for sample number 1. Would you like for me to unpass those back to you really quick so you can look at your samples for number 1 and see? Because what I'm going to ask you to do is just to kind of explain why they, like kind of perhaps maybe why the overall median could be different for each one.
Sure.
Okay. Because from the looks of it, Daniel, you gave for these two, for this specific portion of it, you gave it 2 3s and a 4 for the written comm section, and Zeba, you gave all 3 for 3s. So just specifically focusing on that written communication, the third subcategory, which would be control of syntax and mechanics. What was your opinion of that overall section for this particular portfolio that kind of could have made you more interested in giving it a 3 than a 4?
You mean a 4 than a 3?
Mm-hmm.
More interested in giving it a 4 than a 3, because I gave it a 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
No, okay, I was like, wait, am I going to answer the question right? Essentially, I think it was more so, I think his tone in the presentation of his materials, again, it kind of seemed very casual.
Mm-hmm.
So the context was not always maybe as formal as it needs to be in certain cases. And then in terms of the genre, I'm not sure if I had clarity on all of the genres that he presented, whether it was based on, again, analytical or more research-based writing. And then syntax, I think it was just generally, a few issues with punctuation, from what I can recall.
And for you, Daniel, what made you want to give him a 4 instead of anything less than 4 for that particular subcategory?
Now, we're talking about Drew, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, it's interesting, as I look at this sheet, I'm assuming the 4 is what I gave him the first time. Because I actually gave him a 3 on this one for that category.
Or perhaps it could have been recorded in error, because on that first sheet, I don't think there was anything else up there. Yeah, no, there was none up there. It was a typo. No. No, you gave him a 4 on this one?
No, I gave him a 3 on this one. So
Okay, I fixed that.
in fact, I wonder if, let's look at those scores a little closer. I Are those the scores I gave to Catherine instead of Drew? Because I don't remember giving Drew like all those scores.
You know what it is? I'm sorry about that. You turned two things into me, and I kind of got confused really quick.
Okay.
Well, I will see that really quick, and I'll update the records really
Sure.
quick, because it's technically skewed at the moment. I apologize about that. There, okay. So there is a bit of a difference then. Well, Daniel, what made you give him a 3 also?
You know, the one word that caught my eye in that category was the word straightforward. And that seemed to be a pretty good overall descriptor, you know, of his writing in that particular category. You know, it was straightforward, it was, you know, basic, it really didn't show any particular sophistication that would compel me to give it a 4 or, you know, to give it a higher category. I mean, it had a few errors along the way, you know, in terms of, you know, constructions and syntax and so forth, but nothing really, you know, glaring or major that stood out to me.
Okay, well, what about for the combination portion, the written and critical thinking side on sample number 1? There was also a difference in there as well, because going from the overall median from the critical thinking portion and then looking at the overall median for the combination portion, there was a huge difference. It was, for the combination, the overall median was 2.5, whereas for critical thinking, it was 3. So up here, looking at this one, especially now that the stats have been updated, Daniel, well, you did just explain. Zeba, you gave him a 3 for the combination 1 and 2, and then Daniel, you ranked him with a 2 for both portions. So were there any difference? Could you all possibly explain certain reasons why you kind of did those 2 differences?
Let's see, let me go back to, okay. So with the sources and evidence, I found that he did have sources and evidence, and he stuck true to the format that he was using. So he used a lot of APA format. So in that case, you know, I think he demonstrated a comprehensive knowledge of utilizing sources and evidence. And he actually needed them for his gen ed competency. So I think he, you know, again, provided sufficient knowledge of them. In terms of his positioning and perspective, he did have to complete an abstract or 2, so I think that, I mean, obviously he needs to have some kind of understanding of his hypothesis and perspective in order to construct an abstract and introduction. Most of his essays are for an APA format, so I think a 3 would have been sufficient.
Okay. And Daniel, what made you give him a 2 for both of the combination portions versus a 3 for the for both of them?
So do you mind if I see that sheet again?
Sure.
You know, when I was going through and reading some of his work, it seemed, I mean, the way a lot of it struck me was, it was almost experiential. You know, it was like him saying, okay, well, you know, this is the experience I had, you know, as an intern, you know, working, you know, at this particular company. Or, you know, here's how I think about the issue, you know, involving the explosion in the Gulf and, you know, the resulting consequences.
So more of like from a personal standpoint?
Yeah, you know, without really, you know, without considering a lot of different, you know, different point of views. You know, I don't remember seeing a lot of, you know, challenging of assumptions, you know, in terms of what he had to say.
Now we will skim through sample 2 and looking at the critical thinking portion, comparing the mean of the overall mean for the critical thinking section to the overall mean of the combination section. I can pass those scores back to you as well and just collect the first ones, and then we can discuss those. Okay, and just comparing the overall, like I said, comparing the overall mean for the critical thinking versus the combination section. The overall mean for the critical thinking section was a 1.83, and the overall mean for the combination section was a 2.5. So there's a negative variance in this particular one, given that the combination was a bit higher than the critical thinking. And there's one in particular for the very first subcategory for in critical thinking. Daniel, you ranked her a 1, and Ziba, you ranked her a 2. So Daniel, what made you want to rank her more of a 1? What was it? Some things that could have stopped her from, what are some things that did stop her from having a higher rating?
Well, as I recall, you know, from what I remember about her portfolio, the way it was, you know, the way it was laid out, you know, it seemed pretty superficial. You know, I didn't see a lot of in-depth thinking on the issues that she was talking about. I remember her resume in particular was poorly developed. Even the video, I think, you know, some of the video work she had was, you know, relatively, you know, standard and basic. I mean, I just didn't really see, you know, I didn't see a lot of, you know, critical thinking, you know, being applied in terms of, you know, some of the work that she had in her portfolio.
ranked her a 2. What made you give her a 2 instead of anything higher or lower?
I think mostly when we looked at, the critical thinking component, I think that was pretty subpar on her account. I think just even the presentation of her materials was just kind of, again, more casual, and she was kind of using her language in a more blog-like
Mhm.
format. And she did also have some issues with, modifiers, beginning a sentence in certain types of ways, some issues with, grammar mechanics, I remember. So with all that, I think I had issues with, again, taking her platform and academic setting seriously, what I felt she should have considered in terms of our audience and the presentation of her content. That was really the biggest thing. Her awareness of the genres, the formality of certain documents, and her understanding, I guess, of what she was supposed to do in her particular comments.
So she didn't really demonstrate a clear understanding? Okay, and also for the overall median, there is a big difference from that within the critical thinking and the combination along with the writing. So if we just go right back to the critical thinking, the critical thinking is relatively this, in terms of looking at those differences. Let's see. Okay, so there's a difference also here for the sub-competencies for, let's say, for both of them. For combination 1 and 2, Zeva, I'm sorry, you didn't put it, you give her a 4, you gave her a 2 for the first combination and a 3 for the second. And Daniel, you gave her a 3 for the first combination and a 2 for the second. I was getting that mixed up with the combination number, sorry. So, just looking at those, did you all have any particular, maybe opinions of that, those particular subcategories and reasons why you possibly couldn't have given her higher than, or any reasons why she pretty much got what she got, or? Okay.
her perspective. I don't know if I saw a strong commitment to her thesis statements. It just kind of looked like she was kind of patchworking all of her resources together. Few fragments, so, yeah, just overall, her perspective, I guess, seems to be contingent more so on, you know, how she patched the sources together versus her own kind of voice in the works.
And Daniel, what about you for this particular section? You ranked her a 3 for the first combination subcategory and a 2 for the second.
You know, one thing I appreciated about, you know, what she did in some of her writing was, you know, the effort that she made to work in a variety of different sources, you know, into one of the analysis that she had done. And, yeah, you know, I agree, she didn't do all the, didn't do everything correctly there in terms of the citing and formatting and so forth, but, you know, I think, you know, that was something, you know, by the time I got to that section of her portfolio, you know, I think the earlier parts had been so light that, you know, just, you know, seeing the effort that she made there was a bit of, you know, it was a breath of fresh air, essentially. And, you know, I gave her some credit for that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? So you just gave her credit for what else again?
I gave her credit for, you know, using, or at least attempting to use a variety of different sources in some of her analysis. You know, she didn't do that consistently, you know, throughout, you know, each one. I mean, there's one I'm looking at right now that has, you know, very little in the way of sources being included. But, you know, there were other examples where it seemed like she made an effort to really incorporate a wide variety of different material.
Okay, and let's look at sample number 3. Okay, and looking at this third subcategory as well, the median for the critical thinking portion for the third e-portfolio sample, it was, for the critical thinking part, it was a 3.5, and then for the combination part, it was a 3. So, just looking at those two and going through differences for this third e-portfolio sample, Daniel, you ranked this person, Aubrey, a 3 for the third critical thinking subcategory. And what were some things that you thought that she could improve on?
I think one thing that stood out to me was, you know, she tended to be so passionate about her positions that I don't think she did an especially good job in taking into consideration opposing points of view To the extent that she did, there were some cases where she almost seemed to be kind of setting up a straw man argument that she could just easily refute or counter.
So the argument was just a bit too easy?
In terms of.
So in terms of the audience, or how she was framing it to be?
Right, for folks who have a different point of view than she did. I mean, I think her own writing, or her own thinking is pretty good. But, she just really, I don't think she does an especially good job of considering other points of view.
And Zayla, you gave her a 4 for that particular third critical thinking subcategory. This was for the University of Central Florida, the third sim.
Aubrey. I gave her a 4
For the critical thinking, the conclusions and related outcomes.
Okay, yes. I want to say when I read her documents related to her field, I felt like she had drawn a lot of conclusions based on, again, her own perspective and what her cause was. So I felt that she, did present a lot of strong evidence, although it was biased towards her perspective. And it was presented, I guess, in an effective manner. So I didn't really see a lot wrong with the way it was written, the way in which, like I said, in terms of structure and coherence, I kind of understood what she was saying. So for the purposes of this platform, I think she did what she needed to do as far as conclusions.
Okay.
And I think the reader also was able to draw conclusions about her perspective very clearly because she had a clear perspective. So I don't think we have to assume a lot of the outcomes based on her own interrogative tone.
Okay, and I want to say those are pretty much it for today's meeting and for today's evaluation. We will have another meeting next Friday as well at the same time, and so this is it for today. And you all have a good weekend.
Okay, so are we going to talk about Catherine next week? Okay.
Yes, we were just kind of doing more of an evaluation on the variants and stuff, and then we were going to